My fiancé said, "I've been having doubts about us. Maybe we should take some time apart." 3 days before Valentine's Day, I looked at him and said, "Take all the time you need." Then I quietly unfollowed him on everything, took my mom to the dinner I had already booked, and posted a photo with the caption, "Best date I've ever had." That night, he texted me 32 times. "My name is Adeline Carter. I'm 30 years old." Until that week, I thought I was in the kind of relationship that had already passed the point of sudden collapse. I wasn't reckless in love. I never had been. I believed in slow things, consistency, shared routines, the quiet kind of commitment that doesn't need to announce itself every day because it's already built into the life two people share. That was what I thought I had with Elliot. We had been together for almost 3 years, engaged for 6 months. We weren't dramatic. We didn't live in constant highs and lows. We had a steady rhythm, and I trusted it. Looking back, I can admit something I didn't understand then. Stability and safety are not always the same thing. Sometimes things only look solid because nothing has tested them yet. The night he said it started like any other. The apartment was warm. The dishwasher hummed in the kitchen. His jacket was hanging over the same chair he always used. I was thinking about something small, whether I should change the table setting for Valentine's dinner. That was where my mind was. Normal things, domestic things, future things. Then Elliot sat across from me and said, "I've been thinking." I looked up. "About what?" He paused for a second. "About us." The room changed right there. Not visibly, not dramatically, but I felt it. I set my glass down. "What about us?" He exhaled. "I've been having doubts." "What kind of doubts?" "About whether this is right, whether we should actually go through with the marriage." His voice was calm. Too calm. That was what made it hurt. If he had been angry, I could have answered anger. If he had been confused, I could have stepped toward that. But this didn't sound like confusion. It sounded considered. It sounded like a decision he had already been sitting with alone. "And you're telling me this 3 days before Valentine's Day?" I asked. He glanced away for a moment. "That's not the point." It told me more than he meant it to. A man who says he isn't sure anymore, right before a date that had already been planned, is not speaking impulsively. He's choosing the timing. He may not admit that, but he is. "So what do you want?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "Maybe we should take some time apart." Not a breakup. Not reassurance. Just a soft, controlled gray area. "Time apart?" I repeated. "Just some space," he said, "so I can figure things out." "I can. Not we." I leaned back in my chair and let the silence settle. For a second, I expected panic to rise in me, or anger, or humiliation. Instead, what came first was clarity. When someone needs time to decide whether they still want you, the problem is already larger than the pause they're asking for. "How long?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. Just some time." No timeline, no boundaries, no promise. He wanted room to step back without calling it an ending. He also seemed to assume I would stay emotionally where he left me while he figured himself out. I nodded once. "Okay, take all the time you need." He blinked. "That's it?" I held his gaze. "What were you expecting me to say?" He didn't answer. That silence told me something too. He didn't only want space. He wanted the comfort of believing I would still be there, unchanged, when he was done taking it. I stood up, carried my glass to the kitchen, and put it down carefully. My hands were steady. I noticed that. The steadiness mattered. Behind me, he said, "I don't want this to turn into a fight." I turned back. "It isn't a fight." "Adeline, you said you wanted space," I said. "I'm respecting that." We barely spoke for the rest of the night. He stayed in the living room. I went to bed earlier than usual. The apartment looked the same, but the meaning of everything inside it had shifted. The sounds I heard after I lay down, his footsteps, the refrigerator door, a cabinet opening and closing, were familiar, but they no longer belonged to the same life I had been imagining an hour earlier. I lay awake and forced myself not to romanticize what had just happened. A man who is ready to build a life with you does not sit you down 3 days before Valentine's Day and ask for undefined distance so he can decide whether you're still the right choice. Fear is one thing. Cold uncertainty, delivered like a memo, is another. The next morning, he acted almost normal. He got ready for work, grabbed his keys, and even made the small, automatic gesture of blowing me a kiss before he stopped himself, realizing it no longer fit. I didn't mention it. I didn't ask what he was feeling. I didn't reopen the conversation for his comfort. Over the next 2 days, the distance he had asked for started showing up in ordinary ways. Less conversation, less eye contact, less presence, even when he was physically there. We were still in the same apartment, but he had already begun stepping out of the relationship emotionally. That part, at least, became obvious. And I didn't chase him. I didn't ask what he needed from me. I didn't start listing reasons we were worth saving. I didn't perform loyalty while he reconsidered me. I watched. That was all. On the second night, after he had gone quiet in the living room again, I picked up my phone and opened Instagram. His profile was there, familiar and expected, like it had always been. I stared at it for a second, then unfollowed him. Then I did the same thing everywhere else. Not to punish him, not to get a reaction. I just no longer saw a reason to keep myself plugged into the life of a man who had plainly told me he wasn't sure about keeping me in his. After that, I opened my email. The Valentine's reservation was still there. Window table, exact time, confirmed. I had made it weeks earlier. At the time, it felt like one more small piece of a future we were already moving toward. Now it looked like something else, a plan still standing after the person it was built around had stepped back from it. I read the confirmation twice. The old version of me might have canceled it right then, or kept it open in case he changed his mind. But by that point, something inside me had already started shifting. I picked up my phone and called my mom. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart. Are you free on Valentine's night?" I asked. There was a brief pause. "That doesn't sound casual." "It isn't," I said. I looked out the window at the city lights beginning to come on. "But I want to take you to dinner." Another small pause. Not suspicious, not intrusive, just a mother hearing the tone behind her daughter's words. Then she said softly, "Okay, I'll go." She didn't push for details. She didn't demand an explanation. She just said yes. After I hung up, I stood there for a moment with my phone still in my hand. Nothing had happened loudly. No one had stormed out. No one had slammed a door. But I knew, with complete certainty, that something had changed in a way that could not be undone. Valentine's Day arrived without ceremony. Elliot didn't mention it that morning. Not the reservation, not the fact that we had once planned to spend the evening together. Not even a hollow, obligatory Happy Valentine's. He just moved through the apartment like he always did. Coffee, keys, phone, wallet. Except now every ordinary motion seemed stripped of warmth. "I'll probably be late," he said at the door. I looked up from my mug. Okay. That was all. No explanation, no apology, just another quiet withdrawal dressed up as normal life. After he left, I stood in the kitchen for a minute longer than necessary, letting the silence settle. It didn't feel dramatic. That was what made it so final. Nothing around me looked broken, but the shape of the day had already changed. By late afternoon, I started getting ready. Not out of hope, not to prove anything, just because the night still existed, and so did I. I wore the dress I had bought for the reservation a few weeks earlier. Simple, understated, elegant enough to make me feel composed. I did my makeup the way I always do when I want to feel put together, not transformed. By the time I finished, I looked less like a woman bracing for disappointment and more like someone who had made up her mind not to beg for clarity from a man who had already shown his. My mother arrived right on time. When I opened the door, she looked at me for a moment, and in that one glance, I knew she understood more than I had said on the phone. Still, she kept her voice light. "You look beautiful," she said. I smiled. "So do you." She stepped inside, adjusting her coat. Her eyes moved briefly across the apartment, not snooping, just noticing. The second plate no longer mattered. The missing anticipation did. "Ready?" she asked. "Yeah." We left together. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered it. Warm lighting, low music, small candles flickering on every table. Couples leaned toward each other over drinks and shared desserts, their faces softened by the kind of evening I had expected to have. For one brief moment, I saw the version of the night I had imagined weeks earlier. Elliot across from me, a glass lifted, a conversation about plans, spring, maybe even wedding details. Then the image passed. We were seated at the same window table I had reserved. The city lights stretched across the glass in long reflections, beautiful and slightly blurred. My mother picked up the menu and glanced at me over the top of it. "Do I get the story before dinner?" she asked, "or after?" I let out a quiet breath. "After." She nodded once, then after. That was one of the things I loved most about her. She knew when not to force a wound open just because it was there. Dinner unfolded more gently than I expected. We talked about small things at first. Her neighbor's new dog, a recipe she had tried and ruined, a television show she insisted I would love, and I knew I probably wouldn't. It wasn't avoidance. It was mercy. And somewhere between the appetizer and the main course, I realized I could breathe. Not performatively, not the tight, careful kind of breathing you do when you're trying not to cry in public. really breathe. The pressure in my chest that had been sitting there since Elliot first said the word doubts had eased just enough for me to notice its absence. My mother set down her fork and studied me for a second. "You seem lighter," she said. I gave her a faint, surprised look. "Do I?" "A little," she said. "Not happier, just clearer." Clearer. That was exactly it. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't healed. But I was no longer standing in the fog, waiting for someone else to explain my own life back to me. The shape of things had come into focus. After dinner, we ordered dessert we didn't need and shared it anyway. At one point, my mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to explain everything tonight," she said quietly, "but whatever happened, you're going to be all right." I looked at her, at the calm certainty in her face, and something inside me settled. "I know," I said, and for the first time in days, I meant it. Outside, the night air was cool enough to wake me up a little. We stood together near the curb while we waited for her car. "Call me when you get home," she said. "I will." She touched my arm once before getting in. I stood there long enough to watch the car disappear into traffic, then turned and headed home alone. But it wasn't the same loneliness I had feared when Elliot first asked for space. It felt cleaner than that, more honest. When I stepped back into the apartment, the lights were off. He wasn't home. I wasn't surprised. I set down my bag, slipped off my shoes, and walked into the living room. For a moment, I just stood there in the dark, letting my eyes adjust. The apartment was exactly the same as when I had left it, but I wasn't. That was when I took out my phone. The screen lit up immediately. Notifications. More than I expected. Texts. Missed calls. More texts. At first, the messages were almost casual. "Hey, are you home? Did you go out?" Then sharper. "Why aren't you answering? Who are you with?" I kept scrolling. Then I saw the point where everything had changed. "I saw your post. What is that? Are you serious right now?" "Adeline, pick up the phone." Below that were missed calls, back to back. Then more texts. I counted them twice to make sure I hadn't read it wrong. 32 messages. 32. From the same man who had asked for time. From the same man who had calmly told me he wasn't sure about us. From the same man who had walked out that morning without even acknowledging Valentine's Day. The last message was shorter than the others. "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long moment, and suddenly the whole thing made sense in a way it hadn't before. He hadn't wanted distance in the true sense of the word. He had wanted controlled distance, room to step back, reassess, keep me emotionally nearby, and return when he felt ready. What he hadn't expected was for me to step out of that suspended space and continue living without waiting for his permission. That was what the 32 messages were really about. Not confusion, not heartbreak, loss of control. I locked the phone, set it on the table, and walked past it. For the first time since he had asked for space, I wasn't reacting to what he wanted anymore. I was deciding what I would accept. I didn't answer him that night. Not the texts, not the calls. I left my phone on the table and went to bed. And I slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but enough to know I wasn't falling apart the way he probably expected me to. The next morning, the messages were still there, unread, unanswered, waiting, just like he thought I would be. There were a few more texts. "Adeline, this isn't funny. Can you just respond?" I read them once, then locked my phone. No urgency, no pull. Just information. I made coffee, opened the curtains, let the light in. Routine. That was the only thing I focused on. Because the moment you stop reacting, you start seeing things differently. The front door opened mid-morning. That was unusual. Elliot never came home mid-morning. His footsteps were quicker than usual. Not loud, but direct. "Adeline?" I took a sip of coffee before answering. "I'm in here." He walked into the kitchen, eyes already searching my face. "Why didn't you answer me?" he asked. No greeting, no pause, just the question. "I saw your messages," I said. "That's not what I asked." "I know." He frowned slightly. "Then answer it." I met his gaze. I didn't feel like responding. That stopped him. Not because it was harsh, because it wasn't. There was no emotion behind it. No anger. Just a boundary. "I called you," he said. "I saw." "And you ignored it?" "Yes." Silence. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once. "What was that post?" he asked. "What about it?" "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Act like you don't know what I mean." I set my cup down. "It was dinner," I said, "with my mom." His jaw tightened. "That's not the point." "Then what is?" The caption, the picture, the timing. There it was. Not concern. Not confusion. Control. "You said you wanted space," I said. "I did. So I gave it to you." "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" He hesitated. And for the first time, he didn't have an answer ready. "You went out and posted like everything was fine," he said. "It was fine. We're in the middle of something." "No," I said calmly. You are. That landed. He took a step closer. I said I needed time, he insisted. And you have it. That's not what this feels like. Of course it didn't. Because now the space wasn't centered around him. You don't just move on like that, he said. I held his gaze. I didn't move on. I went to dinner. With that caption? What did you expect me to write? He didn't answer. Because the real answer wasn't something he could say out loud. He expected me to look like I was waiting. You're overreacting, he said. I almost smiled. I'm not reacting at all. That's the problem. Another silence. Shorter this time. Sharper. I just needed time to think, he said again, quieter now. And I gave it to you. You're twisting this. I'm not. He looked at me, searching for something softer, something he could work with. There wasn't anything left to soften. I think we should talk about this properly, he said. I nodded once. We already did. That was where it shifted. You could see it. The moment he realized, the conversation he thought he was starting had already ended. He pulled out the chair and sat across from me. Same place as 2 nights ago. Different energy. What does this look like to you? He asked. It looks like you're unsure, I said. He nodded slowly. Yeah. And you want time? Yes. And you expected me to stay the same while you figured that out. He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it. That's not fair, he said finally. Which part? All of it. I held his gaze. Aren't you asking me to wait? He exhaled, frustrated. I didn't mean it like that. I know. Then why are you acting like this? I'm not acting, I said. I'm responding. To what? He asked. To what you actually said. Silence again. You said you weren't sure about me, I continued. I said I needed time. You said you had doubts. That's not the same. It is to me. That stopped him, because I wasn't arguing his intention. I was defining my reality. So what, you're just done? He asked. There was something different in his voice now. Less control. More uncertainty. I'm not waiting to be chosen, I said. That was it. That was the line. He leaned back slowly. I didn't expect this, he admitted. I know. Another silence. But this one felt final. I texted you last night, he said. I saw. You didn't answer. No. Why? I looked at him. No softening. No cushioning. Because there was nothing to respond to. That landed. Hard. I said we should talk, he pushed. And we are. No, I mean properly. This is properly. He stared at me, trying to find a way back into control. There wasn't one. I think you're shutting down, he said. I think I'm seeing clearly. That was the difference. Clarity doesn't chase. It doesn't wait. It doesn't negotiate its value. I still need time, he said. I know. And you're okay with that? Yes, but not in the way he meant, because I wasn't waiting anymore. He stayed a little longer after that, moved around like he didn't quite belong in the space the same way. Then eventually, I'll text you, he said. Okay. He left. No argument. No dramatic ending. And then, nothing. No messages that night. No calls the next day. No follow-up. A week passed. Then 2. Then a month. Life didn't change all at once. It shifted in small, quiet ways. I slept better. I stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning. I stopped replaying conversations, because I already knew where things had changed. The moment he said he wasn't sure, I cleared space in the apartment, moved his things out, not as a statement, just because they didn't belong there anymore. My mom came by more often. We cooked, watched movies. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, and that helped more than anything. About 3 weeks in, a mutual friend mentioned him. He's been asking about you. I smiled slightly. I'm not surprised. A few days later, his name showed up on my phone again. One message. Hey, can we talk? I stared at it for a long moment, then typed, paused, deleted, typed again, and sent. We already did. I locked my phone, set it down, and didn't pick it up again, because the conversation he thought we needed was already over.